Okay. So what we're going to be working on pretty heavily in this class is understanding how to animate a pivot point. All right. So you guys remember what the hotkey was to move a pivot point? D. Yep. So you use D. Let me grab a box here. We use D to pull up the universal manipulator. And then we're going to hold V to snap it to a vertex. And then D again to accept that new location, right? So this is a great tool for setting our object up, obviously, for rotating from a specific place, scaling from a specific place, and obviously translating, but translating from a specific place means a little bit less than the other two. So what we need to be able to do in a realistic animation is move that pivot point throughout the model, animating its location so that the point that an object lands on is always its new point of rotation, right? If I have, let's say I have a plane here. Let me give this dude some color real quick. All right. I'll get rid of that. So if I have this guy right here, it's currently sitting on the ground, right? But let's say that I wanted it to roll, all right? If I make it roll right now with its pivot point in the center of the object, it's going to pull itself right through the floor, right? Which isn't good. So where would I need that pivot point to exist? On the bottom, but where at on the bottom? Right now it's smacked in the center of the object.
Bottom corner of whatever side you're turning to.
Yes, exactly. So if I'm rolling from left to right, I need to hit my D, snap this thing to one of these edges, hit D again. Now it rolls over that edge, right? So I've gotten it there. Now what if I want to continue rolling this thing?
You gotta keep on moving the pivot point.
Yeah, exactly. The pivot point has to continue to move to the edge which it's about to roll over, right? Now, the same issue happens. Let's say that I have an object. A second. Let's say that I'm dropping this object, right? As I drop this object, think, it hits my surface, right? It bounces up. This can still be its point of pivot, or pivot point. But as it rotates midair, it's going to come down on maybe this corner, right? So if that's true, by the time it makes contact here on the surface, this has to become its new pivot point, right? That way, one, we can make sure that we're snapping that to the grid, making sure that that hits the grid, not some other point. but also because this thing might just settle down. Boom, boom, something like that. Maybe it's a really heavy block, so it just has to boom and settle down in place, right? Well, obviously it can't do that if the pivot point is up on one of the points that's in the air, right? It's going to be pretty awkward. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, first we have to make everything keyable. By everything, I mean the channels that are operated by our pivot point. Let me zero some of this stuff out real quick. Oops. All right. So we have to be able to make the channels that this thing, that the pivot point itself is rotating on, scalable, or keyable, sorry, not scalable. So where do we do that? Well, over here on the right-hand side, we have a bunch of different channels, right? But we can also add new channels into this channel box. So if we come over here to edit, and come on down here, should be channel control, I'm just gonna make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see. And then we scroll down in this middle, the non-keyable hidden area. We're scrolling down and we see that we've got rotate pivot translates and our rotate pivots. So these guys right here. So we take these and we add those into the keyable, all right? Now, one thing that's kind of goofy is they have the different move keys kind of on the opposite sides of where you would think they should be, right? If I were to do this, I would say, put them in make keyable or make non-keyable. I wouldn't say move one direction or the other. That's kind of weird. Okay, so we're gonna move them to keyable. Boom. Now, if you notice over on the right-hand side, we've got a whole list, or a whole extra list of goodies attached to this guy. Now, you're gonna have to do this to every object in your scene that you intend to key a pivot point on, right? Every time you make a new object, it's only gonna have the standards. Translates, rotates, scales, and visibility, all right? If you wanted to change a property, like maybe I don't want visibility to be keyable anymore on this object for whatever reason, I can also sling that over to non-keyable hidden and then just remove that from what's keyable. This is also really helpful if, let's say that you're working with an object and you really need it to be able to be keyed in translation, but you don't want it to be keyed in rotation or scale ever. Only want it to move about, right? This is a great place to do that. To come in, grab all of those scales and rotations or whichever channels you don't want to key and move them all into non-keyable. And then, yeah, that's taken care of. You can get crazy with your animation, hit your S's, and never once have to worry about any channel that you don't want keying being keyed. All right. So I'm just going to throw my visibility back over here just because. So once we have that, we're good to go there. I'm going to write that on the board really fast. So it's inside of your control box or channel box. Sorry. So your channel box menu. And it's going to be in edit. And then you have channel control right there. Channel control. And again, just so we remember, D is pivot point. And D again accepts the new location.
Yeah, I'll be. Yeah, I'll come up your car.
All right. Let's see if I can get a quick screen share. There we go. So channel box menu, edit, channel control. D is your pivot point. D again accepts that new location. All right. Go back to our screen share. Starting to get to be a pro at this thing. It's not as bad as I thought. So I don't like it, but it's not bad as I thought. Okay. So one thing to note is that your pivot point locations will never zero out. All right. So what do I mean by that? When we freeze our transformations, you're never going to get your pivot point transformations to freeze out to zero, right? They're always going to be based off of the world location, that world zero. That's kind of how Maya understands where an object is located in reference to that 0, 0, 0 point. The object itself may have a 0 point just so the computer knows to leave it in that spot to always reference back to the object location, but the computer still knows how far the pivot point is from that 0, 0, 0 spot in the world so that things don't move around, right? Okay. So let me make sure I set this file up real fast. Rewind this, there we go. So we need to be able to move this object across our map. All right. We're going to start off with just a simple cube roll, piece of cake, or it'll seem like a piece of cake until it's not. So it's kind of important that we understand the flow of setting our keys. All right. If we mess them up, then it's going to be not great. Right? You're going to have to go back and delete some keys and try again. And you'll end up with, in some sense, 2 saved instances of a pivot point. So you'll see that here in a little bit, more than likely, where you'll have 2 yellow dots on your object at the same time, and your objects will get acting wonky. That's because you didn't do the process in the exact order that you need to. All right, so we're going to roll this box from the left to the right, which, as we stated before, means that we need to put our pivot point on the rolling edge, right? So D, hold V, just drag that over a little bit, snap it to there, to the rolling edge, and then hit D again to accept that new location, all right? Now, I'm gonna set my first pivot point, or I'm sorry, my first key. Probably should freeze my transformations first, since I'm about to start rolling. So I froze my transformations. Now, I'm gonna set my first key, boom. It's gonna key everything. I'm gonna move forward, let's say 10 frames. I'm gonna rotate this object. Now, here's a new hotkey for you. It's J. J snaps your rotations. I believe it's the 15-degree increments by default. It will also snap translations to one full unit. Whatever that unit might be set to. I believe it snaps scales as well. I don't remember what the calculation is. I believe it's just one. Let's see real fast. Yes, it increases scale by one full number as well. Snaps. Okay. So this is a really helpful thing, especially if we're animating constant number rotations or scales or anything like that, even just in modeling, because you can get really quick calculations without thinking about it too much. So I've moved forward 10 frames. I'm going to hold J and rotate. And snap it. You notice I'm over on -90 now. Now, here's where it gets weird. People want to do everything all at once. I'm going to do my rotation first. I'm going to set my key. All right. Then I'm going to hit my translate key, hit D, and then move this over to the new edge. Accept it, and then set that new key. All right. You want to do it in that order. If you mix it up, it's going to get weird. And you're going to end up with multiple instances of your pivot point. Basically, you're just going to confuse your object, and it's going to start rolling really strange. So we're going to do this again in that same order. We're going to pick 10 more frames forward. You can pick whichever increment you like. I'm going to rotate it. I'll hold J just so that it snaps. I'm going to set my key, S. Then W for my translate key. D to move my pivot point. I'm going to hold V. What does holding V do? Snaps to vertex. Boom. Snap it to my vertex. Release, hit D again, accepts that new location. Notice on the right-hand side in your channel box, you've got 2 pink channels right now, right? That's the pivot, rotate, and the pivot translate, or rotate, pivot, translate. So we're gonna hit that key again. Boom, S. And now if we scrub through these, let me pop back through here. Our ball, or not ball, but our box is rolling. Now, there is something strange going on. What's that?
It's going under the plane.
Correct. So if I scroll up here or pull my graph editor up, we have a slight issue with the fact that our rotate pivot and rotate pivot translate, so let me grab all those guys. These splines are easing in and easing out of each other. So what's happening is the rotation point, every frame is slowly sliding. If I'm starting over here and I want to end over here, over 10 frames, this thing is slowly sliding itself across the bottom of that object, right? And because that's happening, it means that my rotation point is constantly changing. It's like if you put a board on a ball and you roll the ball and kind of press down, it doesn't really know where to rotate from, right? I mean, it does know, but you're getting a different result every second or every couple seconds. So what we want to do, remember, we can make things linear. We can try linear. Linear is just going to shoot it from one to the next, but we have another one that doesn't do any translation. It just immediately changes from one thing to the next, right? And that's called stepped. So what I'm going to do is grab everything here. I'm going to come over to tangents and come down to stepped. Notice that just turned these into completely linear calculations. Boom, 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 right? So now, if I come over here, boom, boom, notice my box rolls perfectly on the surface, never penetrates through the floor. All right.